The December morning mist clung to the ancient oak trees surrounding Winterbourne estate like a familiar embrace. Prince Alexander stood at the tall windows of the blue drawing room, watching as groundskeepers prepared the traditional Christmas walking path that had been used by his family for over 2 centuries. His reflection stared back at him from the frost-touched glass, but his mind was elsewhere, wrestling with decisions that would change everything his family had known. Princess Isabella entered the room quietly, her footsteps muffled by the Persian carpet that had witnessed countless family discussions over the decades. She carried 2 steaming cups of tea, a morning ritual they had maintained even during their most challenging times. The delicate china clinked softly as she set the cups down on the mahogany table near the window. "You're thinking about the announcement again," Isabella observed, settling into the velvet armchair beside him. Her voice carried the gentle authority that had made her beloved by the people of their kingdom. She had learned long ago to read the subtle tension in her husband's shoulders, the way his fingers drummed against the windowsill when weighty matters occupied his thoughts. Alexander turned from the window, his expression grave but determined. "The people deserve to know before the Christmas walk. We can't continue this charade of normalcy when everything is about to change." He moved to join her, accepting the offered tea with grateful hands. The warmth spread through his fingers, a small comfort in the face of monumental uncertainty. Their kingdom of Aldoria had been shaken by recent events that had forced the royal family to reconsider their entire approach to public service. Economic pressures, changing social expectations, and a growing desire among younger citizens for more transparency from their monarchy had created an environment where traditional methods no longer sufficed. The Christmas walk, where the royal family traditionally greeted thousands of well-wishers along the estate's historic pathway, had become a symbol of accessibility and connection with the people. Isabella sipped her tea thoughtfully, her green eyes reflecting the morning light streaming through the windows. Queen Victoria would have handled this differently, she mused, referring to Alexander's formidable mother, who had ruled with an iron will and traditional values until her abdication 3 years prior. She believed that mystery and distance were essential to maintaining royal authority. "And perhaps she was right for her time," Alexander replied, settling into his chair. "But we're living in a different world now. Social media, instant communication, global transparency movements. The old ways of governing through mystique and ceremony aren't enough anymore. The people want to know their leaders, to understand our decisions, to feel connected to the institution they support through their taxes." The weight of impending change pressed heavily on both of them. Alexander had spent months in consultation with advisors, constitutional experts, and most importantly, with Isabella herself. The decisions they had reached were radical by royal standards, but they felt necessary for the survival and relevance of the monarchy in the modern age. Isabella reached across the small table and took her husband's hand. Their wedding rings caught the morning light, simple bands that had replaced the elaborate ceremonial rings they had worn during their coronation. Even these small changes had been part of their gradual shift toward a more approachable royal style. "Tell me again about the timeline," she said softly. "I want to make sure we're prepared for every possibility." Alexander's expression grew more focused as he shifted into the methodical planning mode that had served him well throughout his reign. "The staff briefing is this afternoon at 2 o'clock. We'll inform the household first. They've served our family faithfully for decades, and they deserve to hear it directly from us, not from news reports or gossip." He paused to take a sip of tea, gathering his thoughts. "Tomorrow morning we'll meet with the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. Constitutional protocol requires their formal acknowledgement of our decision, even though the changes are within our royal prerogative." "And the media announcement?" Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. They had rehearsed this timeline countless times, but repetition helped calm her nerves about the public reaction they would inevitably face. "Wednesday morning, 2 days before the Christmas walk. We'll release a formal statement to all major news outlets simultaneously, then follow with a televised address at noon. That gives the public and the press time to process the information before they see us in person." Alexander's voice carried the confidence of careful planning, but Isabella could detect the underlying uncertainty that no amount of preparation could eliminate. The Christmas walk had always been more than just a holiday tradition. It represented the contract between the royal family and their people, a visible demonstration of accessibility, continuity, and shared celebration. For over 200 years, members of the royal family had walked the same pathway through the estate grounds, greeting citizens who came from across the kingdom and beyond to wish them well during the holiday season. Isabella rose and moved to the window where Alexander had been standing. The groundskeepers were now setting up the traditional barriers that would guide the crowd along the walking route. Their efficiency was born of decades of experience, but this year would test everyone's adaptability. "The children are going to have questions," she said, watching as workers positioned signs along the pathway. "Charlotte especially. You know how perceptive she is." Their 3 children, Princess Charlotte, age 16, Prince James, age 14, and Princess Emma, age 11, had grown up understanding their roles within the royal structure. But the changes their parents were about to announce would alter their futures in ways that required careful explanation and support. Alexander joined Isabella at the window, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We'll tell them tonight after dinner. They need to hear it from us before anyone else. Charlotte's old enough to understand the implications, and James is already questioning traditional royal protocols in his history studies. Emma," he paused, thinking of his youngest daughter's spirited personality. "Emma will adapt. She always does." The morning light continued to strengthen, casting long shadows across the estate grounds. In the distance, Isabella could see the first signs of preparation for the media attention that would soon descend upon Winterbourne. Security personnel were conducting their routine sweeps of the area, but their presence was more noticeable today, a reminder of the scrutiny that accompanied every royal decision. "I keep thinking about your mother's reaction when we first discussed these ideas with her," Isabella said with a slight smile. "I thought she might actually faint when you mentioned removing some of the formal protocols." Alexander chuckled, the first genuine lightness he had shown all morning. "She recovered quickly enough to lecture me for 2 hours about the importance of tradition and the dangers of modernization, but even she admitted, toward the end of our conversation, that times are changing whether we adapt or not." The former queen's eventual support, albeit grudging, had been crucial to Alexander's confidence in moving forward. Her wisdom and experience, even when filtered through traditional perspectives, provided valuable insight into the potential consequences of their decisions. She had agreed to attend the Christmas walk despite her reservations, understanding that family unity during times of change was essential for maintaining public confidence. Isabella returned to her chair, but her posture remained alert and engaged. "What worries me most isn't the public reaction. We've weathered criticism before. It's the long-term implications for the children. Are we making their lives easier or more complicated?" This question had haunted both parents throughout their decision-making process. Royal children already faced unique pressures and expectations, but the changes they were implementing would fundamentally alter the traditional path of royal development and duty. Alexander leaned forward, his expression earnest. "We're giving them choices that we never had. Yes, it will be more complicated in some ways, but it will also be more honest. They'll be able to develop their own relationships with public service, their own understanding of what it means to serve the people." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Peters, the family's longtime personal secretary, entered with his customary discretion. His expression was professionally neutral, but Isabella could detect the curiosity that all the staff must be feeling about the unusual level of activity and closed-door meetings that had characterized the past few weeks. "Your Royal Highnesses," Peters said with a slight bow, "the morning briefing materials are ready for your review, and the communications team has requested confirmation of this afternoon's meeting time." "Thank you, Peters," Alexander replied. "Please confirm 2 o'clock for the staff briefing, and ensure that all department heads are present. This affects everyone." As Peters withdrew, Isabella and Alexander exchanged a look that communicated volumes about their shared commitment to the path they had chosen. The morning had been spent in final preparation and mutual support, but the real work was about to begin. The remainder of their morning would be consumed with reviewing press statements, finalizing logistical arrangements, and mentally preparing for the conversations that would shape their family's future. But for these few remaining moments, they sat together in the quiet comfort of their private space, drawing strength from each other for the challenges ahead. Alexander reached for Isabella's hand again, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that had become their personal symbol of unity and support. "Whatever happens after we make this announcement, we face it together," he said quietly. Isabella squeezed his hand in response, her voice steady and confident. "Together," she agreed, "just as we always have." Outside their window, Winterbourne Estate continued its preparations for what would become the most significant Christmas walk in its long history. Though the workers and staff could not yet know how dramatically their world was about to change. The afternoon staff meeting convened in the Grand Library, a room that had hosted countless important family discussions over the generations. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes that chronicled not only world history, but the detailed records of royal protocol and tradition that had guided the family for centuries. Today, those same traditions would be challenged in ways that previous generations could never have imagined. Alexander stood before the assembled household staff, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity, concern, and loyal attention. These were people who had dedicated their careers to serving the royal family, many following in the footsteps of parents and grandparents who had done the same. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, had been with the family for 37 years. Thomas, the head groundskeeper, had maintained the estate's gardens since before Alexander's birth. Their commitment and discretion had been absolute, and they deserved honest communication about the changes that would affect their daily responsibilities. Isabella sat in one of the leather armchairs near the fireplace, providing silent support while Alexander addressed their extended household family. The formal seating arrangement had been deliberately abandoned in favor of a more intimate circle that encouraged dialogue and questions. "I want to thank each of you for your years of dedicated service to our family," Alexander began, his voice carrying the weight of genuine gratitude and respect. "What I'm about to share with you will change how we operate as a household, but it will never change our appreciation for your commitment and professionalism." Peters, who had been instrumental in organizing this meeting, handed out folders containing detailed information about the upcoming changes. The documents had been carefully prepared to explain not just what would change, but why these changes were necessary and how they would be implemented gradually to minimize disruption. "Beginning with the new year," Alexander continued, "we will be implementing what we're calling the Winterbourne reforms. These changes are designed to modernize our approach to public service while maintaining the dignity and effectiveness that the people of Aldoria expect from their royal family." Henderson, whose no-nonsense approach had made her invaluable to the family's daily operations, raised her hand slightly. "Your Highness, will these changes affect staffing levels? Some of us have been concerned about job security given the rumors we've heard about budget considerations." Alexander appreciated her directness, which had always characterized their working relationship. "Actually, Mrs. Henderson, we'll be expanding certain areas of our operations. The changes we're making will require additional support, not fewer positions. However, some traditional roles will evolve, and we'll be providing training and development opportunities to help everyone adapt to new responsibilities." Isabella rose from her chair and moved to stand beside her husband, her presence indicating shared responsibility for these decisions. "One of the most significant changes," she said, addressing the group with the same warm authority she brought to public engagements, "is that we'll be opening portions of Winterbourne Estate to regular public tours throughout the year, not just during special events." This announcement prompted murmurs of surprise throughout the room. Winterbourne had always been the family's private retreat, carefully separated from their official residence in the capital city. The idea of regular public access represented a fundamental shift in how they balanced privacy with accessibility. Thomas, the head groundskeeper, leaned forward in his chair. "Your Highness, the gardens and grounds have always been maintained for family use and special occasions. Opening them to regular tours will require significant changes in our maintenance schedules and security protocols." "You're absolutely right, Thomas," Alexander acknowledged. "We'll be working closely with you to develop new maintenance routines that accommodate public access while preserving the beauty and tranquility that makes these grounds so special. Additionally, we'll be hiring additional groundskeeping staff to support the increased activity." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours as staff members asked detailed questions about everything from security procedures to daily schedules. Alexander and Isabella answered each inquiry with patience and honesty, recognizing that these dedicated employees needed clear information to adapt to their changing roles. Maria Santos, the family's newest staff member who had joined the communications team just 6 months earlier, asked about media relations. "Will the increased public access affect how we handle press inquiries and photo opportunities?" Isabella fielded this question, drawing on her years of experience with media management. "We're actually planning to be more proactive in our media relations. Instead of carefully controlled formal events, we want to provide more authentic glimpses into our work and family life. This means more spontaneous interactions, more accessibility for interviews and features, and more transparency about our decision-making processes." The implications of this shift were significant for everyone in the room. Royal protocol had traditionally emphasized careful control of public image through precisely managed appearances and communications. Moving toward greater transparency would require new skills and approaches from the entire household team. As the meeting continued, Alexander outlined the timeline for implementing these changes. The Christmas walk would serve as the public introduction to their new approach, but the full transformation would occur gradually over the following months. Staff training programs would begin in January, new security protocols would be developed and tested, and public tours would start with limited schedules before expanding based on demand and experience. Mrs. Henderson raised another practical concern. What about the children's privacy? Princess Emma especially has always enjoyed having Winterbourne as her completely private space. How do we balance public access with their need for normal family life? This question struck at the heart of Alexander and Isabella's most significant concerns about their decision. Protecting their children's development and well-being while serving the public interest required careful consideration and planning. "We've designated specific areas of the estate that will remain completely private," Isabella explained. "The family wing, the children's play areas, and their study spaces will be off-limits to tours and media access. We're also establishing clear protocols for when the children want to interact with visitors and when they prefer privacy." The discussion revealed the complexity of balancing royal duty with family life in an increasingly connected world. Every decision had multiple implications that rippled through all aspects of their household operations. Peters, who had been taking detailed notes throughout the meeting, addressed administrative concerns. "We'll need to update all our internal procedures manuals and create new training materials for interacting with increased public access. I recommend establishing working groups for each major area of operations: security, housekeeping, grounds maintenance, communications, and family services." Alexander approved this suggestion immediately. The success of their reforms would depend on careful planning and smooth implementation across all aspects of their operations. Working groups would ensure that experienced staff members could contribute their expertise while learning new approaches. As the meeting drew toward its conclusion, the mood in the room had shifted from initial surprise and concern to engaged problem-solving. The staff's questions had become increasingly focused on practical implementation rather than fundamental concerns about the changes themselves. Sarah Williams, who managed the estate's finances and logistics, asked about budgeting for the expanded operations. "Will we need to modify our annual budget cycles to accommodate the new programs and staffing requirements?" "We've been working with financial advisors to develop a comprehensive budget that covers all aspects of the reforms," Alexander replied. "The increased public access will actually generate revenue through tour fees and estate shop sales, which will help offset the additional operational costs. We're committed to making this transition financially sustainable for the long term." Isabella added, "We also want to ensure that these changes enhance rather than burden your working conditions. Part of our expanded budget includes improvements to staff facilities, updated equipment, and additional professional development opportunities." The final portion of the meeting focused on communication protocols. Alexander emphasized that while they were moving toward greater transparency, the staff's traditional discretion remained crucial during the transition period. "Until our public announcement on Wednesday, please continue to handle all inquiries with our standard protocols," he instructed. "After the announcement, we'll have detailed guidelines for how to discuss the changes with media, visitors, and external contacts." Mrs. Henderson, who had been quietly absorbing all the information, stood to address her colleagues. "I've served this family through many changes over the years, and I've learned that their judgment about what's best for Aldoria and its people is always sound. These reforms will require adjustments from all of us, but I'm confident we can implement them successfully while maintaining the standards of excellence this household has always represented." Her endorsement carried significant weight with the other staff members, many of whom looked to her leadership and experience for guidance during uncertain times. The murmur of agreement that followed her statement indicated growing acceptance and commitment to making the transition successful. As the meeting concluded, Alexander and Isabella made themselves available for individual questions and concerns. Several staff members approached them privately to discuss specific aspects of their roles or to offer suggestions based on their experience. Thomas pulled Alexander aside to discuss the practical implications of opening the gardens to regular tours. "The Rose Garden will be at its peak during the spring months," he noted. "If we're going to have regular visitors, we might want to plan some special educational programs about the estate's horticultural history." This suggestion sparked Alexander's enthusiasm for the educational potential of their reforms. "That's exactly the kind of enhanced public engagement we're hoping to achieve. What if we developed seasonal programs that help visitors understand not just the beauty of the estate, but its history and the work that goes into maintaining it?" Isabella overheard this conversation and joined them, her face lighting up with possibility. "We could create partnerships with local schools and universities. The estate could become a living classroom for history, horticulture, art, and even government studies." The vision that emerged from these informal discussions exceeded even Alexander and Isabella's original plans for their reforms. The staff's expertise and enthusiasm were generating ideas for programs and opportunities that would enhance both public service and educational value. Peters approached with his notebook full of action items and next steps. "I'll coordinate the working groups we discussed and have preliminary reports ready by the end of next week. Should I also begin reaching out to educational institutions about potential partnership opportunities?" "Yes," Isabella agreed. "But let's start with informal conversations to gauge interest. We want to make sure any partnerships align with our goals and values." As the library gradually emptied, Alexander and Isabella remained behind to process the afternoon's discussions. The staff's positive response and constructive suggestions had exceeded their expectations and reinforced their confidence in the path they had chosen. "They're going to make this work better than we ever imagined," Isabella observed, gathering the extra copies of the information packets. "Their questions and ideas have already improved our planning." Alexander nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he was carrying. "Their support makes everything feel more possible. Tomorrow's political meetings might be more challenging, but knowing our household team is behind these changes gives me confidence." The afternoon had demonstrated that even significant change could be managed successfully with honest communication, careful planning, and respect for the people whose lives would be affected. As they prepared for the next phase of their announcement process, Alexander and Isabella felt increasingly optimistic about their family's future and their ability to serve their people in new and meaningful ways. The Prime Minister's official residence at No. 12 Whitehall Gardens had witnessed countless historic discussions over the centuries, but Tuesday morning's meeting would challenge even its storied walls. Prime Minister Elizabeth Thornton arrived early, reviewing briefing documents that her senior advisors had prepared based on the preliminary information Prince Alexander's office had provided the previous evening. Thornton, who had served as Prime Minister for 3 years following her party's decisive electoral victory, had developed a respectful working relationship with the royal family that balanced constitutional requirements with practical governance needs. Her background as a constitutional lawyer before entering politics made her particularly suited to navigate the complex legal and procedural questions that Alexander's proposed reforms would inevitably raise. Alexander and Isabella arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, accompanied by their constitutional advisor, Lord William Ashford, whose expertise in royal law had guided the monarchy through several previous modernization efforts. The meeting began in Thornton's private study, a comfortable room lined with legal texts and political biographies that reflected her scholarly approach to governance. "Your Royal Highnesses," Thornton began after the formal greetings were completed, "I must confess that your preliminary outline has generated considerable discussion among my senior ministers. The scope of changes you're proposing represents the most significant modernization of the monarchy since the constitutional reform acts of the early 20th century. Isabella appreciated the Prime Minister's direct approach, which had always characterized their interactions on matters of mutual concern. "We understand that these changes will require careful coordination between the Crown and the government. That's precisely why we wanted to discuss them with you before our public announcement." Lord Ashford opened his leather portfolio and distributed copies of the legal analysis his team had prepared. From a constitutional perspective, he explained, the majority of the proposed reforms fall within the Crown's traditional prerogative and don't require parliamentary approval. However, several elements will benefit from government coordination and support. Thornton reviewed the documents quickly, her legal training evident in how efficiently she identified key issues. The establishment of regular public tours at Winterbourne Estate is straightforward from a legal standpoint, but it will require coordination with security services and potentially tourism authorities for proper licensing and insurance coverage. Alexander leaned forward in his chair, eager to address practical concerns that might complicate implementation. We've already begun preliminary discussions with the security services about enhanced protocols for regular public access. The head of our protection unit believes we can maintain appropriate security while creating meaningful public engagement opportunities. The conversation turned to more complex constitutional questions raised by other aspects of the reforms. Alexander and Isabella's plan included establishing what they called community partnership programs that would involve direct royal participation in local governance initiatives, educational programs, and economic development projects. This is where we enter less clearly defined constitutional territory, Thornton noted, referring to her briefing materials. Royal participation in what could be characterized as political activities requires careful consideration of traditional neutrality requirements. Isabella had anticipated this concern and had spent considerable time developing responses that would satisfy constitutional requirements while achieving their goals. Our legal team has carefully structured these programs to focus on nonpartisan community development rather than political advocacy. We're not taking positions on specific policies or candidates, but rather supporting community capacity building that serves broad public interests. Lord Ashford added supporting detail to Isabella's explanation. The precedent exists in various Commonwealth monarchies where royal family members participate in community development without compromising political neutrality. The key is maintaining focus on practical support rather than policy advocacy. Thornton's expression suggested cautious optimism about this approach, but she raised additional concerns that reflected her responsibility to consider broader implications. Public and media reaction to increased royal visibility in community affairs could create pressure for political statements or positions on controversial issues. How do you plan to maintain appropriate boundaries when faced with such pressure? This question addressed one of Alexander and Isabella's most significant challenges in implementing their reforms. Greater public engagement inevitably meant greater exposure to situations where traditional royal neutrality would be tested. We've developed specific communication protocols with our media team, Alexander explained. When engaged in community programs, we'll focus consistently on highlighting local achievements, supporting community-led initiatives, and celebrating civic engagement without taking positions on the political processes that may be involved. The discussion continued through the morning as they worked through various scenarios and potential complications. Thornton's questions were thorough and sometimes challenging, but Alexander and Isabella appreciated her careful attention to constitutional requirements and practical governance concerns. Deputy Prime Minister James Morrison joined the meeting during the second hour to discuss coordination between royal community programs and existing government initiatives. His presence brought additional perspective on how the reforms might complement or complicate current policy priorities. One potential benefit of your increased community engagement, Morrison observed, is that it could enhance public understanding and appreciation of local government functions. If managed properly, royal participation in community development could actually strengthen civic institutions rather than competing with them. Isabella found this perspective encouraging, as it aligned with their hopes that the reforms would enhance rather than diminish other forms of public service. That's exactly our intention. We want to use our platform to highlight the excellent work being done by local leaders and community organizations, not to overshadow or replace their efforts. The conversation shifted to discussing specific pilot programs that would test their approaches before full implementation. Alexander outlined plans to begin with 3 carefully selected communities that represented different geographic, economic, and demographic characteristics of their kingdom. We've identified communities that have expressed interest in partnership programs and have strong local leadership to guide the initiatives, he explained. Starting with pilot programs allows us to refine our approaches based on real experience before expanding to additional communities. Thornton approved of this cautious approach, which demonstrated respect for the complexity of implementing constitutional changes. I'd like to assign a liaison from my office to work with your team during the pilot phase. This would ensure ongoing coordination and provide a channel for addressing any concerns that arise. Lord Ashford welcomed this suggestion, recognizing that successful implementation would depend on smooth cooperation between royal and government offices. Regular coordination meetings during the pilot phase would also allow us to document best practices and develop standard procedures for future expansion. The meeting's final hour focused on media and communications coordination. Thornton's press secretary, Margaret Collins, joined them to discuss how government and royal communications teams could work together during the announcement period and subsequent implementation. Public reaction to significant royal announcements can sometimes generate questions about government positions or policies, Collins noted. We should coordinate our messaging to ensure consistency and avoid any confusion about the relationship between royal reforms and government initiatives. Isabella appreciated this professional approach to media coordination, which would help both offices manage public communication more effectively. Our communications team is prepared to work closely with yours to ensure that our respective messages are complementary and clear. Alexander added his own perspective on media relations during the transition period. We're committed to being available for interviews and public questions about the reforms. Transparency is central to our goals, and that includes being accountable to public scrutiny about our decisions and implementation. This commitment to accessibility impressed Thornton, who had observed previous royal communication strategies that emphasized careful control over media access. Your willingness to engage directly with public questions will likely be well received, but it also requires careful preparation for handling unexpected or challenging inquiries. Collins offered to coordinate media training sessions that would help royal communication staff prepare for the increased volume and intensity of media attention the reforms would generate. This practical support demonstrated the government's commitment to helping the reforms succeed. As the meeting approached its conclusion, Thornton summarized the main points of coordination and support that her government would provide. The list included security consultation, legal review of pilot programs, media coordination, and ongoing liaison through the implementation period. From the government's perspective, she concluded, these reforms represent positive evolution of the monarchy's role in modern democratic society. We're committed to providing whatever support is necessary to ensure successful implementation. Alexander expressed sincere appreciation for the government's constructive approach to their proposals. Your support and guidance make these reforms not just possible, but more likely to succeed in serving the people of Aldoria effectively. Isabella added her own thanks while emphasizing the collaborative spirit that would be necessary for long-term success. This partnership between Crown and government in modernizing royal service demonstrates the kind of cooperation that benefits everyone in our democratic system. Lord Ashford gathered his documents and prepared to leave with specific action items for legal review and constitutional documentation of the agreements reached during the meeting. His next task would be preparing formal documentation that would serve as the legal foundation for implementing the reforms. Thornton walked Alexander and Isabella to their car personally, a gesture that demonstrated her personal support for their initiatives beyond the formal constitutional requirements. I look forward to seeing how these programs develop, she said. The pilot communities are fortunate to be part of this innovative approach to public service. As their car pulled away from number 12 Whitehall Gardens, Alexander and Isabella felt a profound sense of relief and accomplishment. The government's support had been more comprehensive than they had dared hope, and the professional collaboration they had experienced gave them confidence about navigating the complex implementation process ahead. One more conversation to go, Isabella said, referring to their meeting with the children scheduled for that evening. In some ways, that will be the most important discussion of all. Alexander nodded, knowing that their family's unity and the children's understanding would be crucial to the success of everything they were trying to accomplish. They've been watching our closed-door meetings and sensing the tension. They deserve to know what we've been planning and why we believe it's important. The drive back to Winterbourne Estate gave them time to process the morning's discussions and prepare mentally for the evening's family conversation. Tomorrow would bring the public announcement that would transform their private plans into public reality. But tonight they would focus on ensuring their children understood and supported the path their family was choosing. The success of the morning's political meetings had exceeded their expectations and provided a strong foundation for moving forward. With government support secured and constitutional questions addressed, they could approach their public announcement with confidence about both the legal framework and practical implementation of their vision for modernized royal service. As Winterbourne Estate came into view, Alexander and Isabella saw the ongoing preparations for the Christmas walk that would soon become the first public demonstration of their new approach to royal engagement. The familiar sight of their family home reminded them that all their planning and preparation was ultimately about creating a better balance between public service and family life, between tradition and innovation, between royal duty and human connection. Tuesday evening's family dinner took place in the smaller, more intimate dining room that the royal family preferred for private meals. Unlike the grand, formal dining hall used for state occasions, this space reflected personal tastes and family memories, with photographs spanning generations and artwork created by the children during their younger years. The comfortable atmosphere usually encouraged relaxed conversation, but tonight tension filled the room as Charlotte, James, and Emma sensed the unusual gravity of their parents' recent behavior. Isabella had worked with the kitchen staff to prepare the children's favorite meal, roasted chicken with herbs from the estate gardens, fresh vegetables, and homemade bread that filled the room with comforting aromas. Food had always played an important role in their family connections, and she hoped familiar flavors would provide stability during what would inevitably be a challenging conversation. Alexander sat at the head of the rectangular table, with Isabella to his right and the three children arranged around the remaining sides. 16-year-old Princess Charlotte displayed the poise and awareness that had characterized her since childhood, but her carefully controlled expression suggested she had already deduced that this dinner involved more than usual family time. Prince James, 14 and increasingly interested in the political and historical aspects of royal duty, had been asking pointed questions about the unusual number of meetings and official visitors to the estate over recent weeks. His analytical nature, which served him well in his academic studies, had clearly been applied to observing his parents' recent activities. 11-year-old Princess Emma approached the evening with characteristic enthusiasm, chattering about her riding lesson earlier that day and her plans for the upcoming school holiday. Her natural buoyancy filled some of the conversational space, while the adults gathered courage for the serious discussion ahead. As the main course was served, Alexander and Isabella exchanged a look that communicated their mutual commitment to handling this conversation with honesty, sensitivity, and respect for each child's individual personality and needs. They had rehearsed various approaches, but ultimately decided that straightforward communication would serve their family best. We asked you to join us for dinner tonight because we have some important information to share about changes that will affect our family and our work. Isabella began, her voice carrying the warm authority the children had always trusted. These are positive changes that we believe will help us serve the people of Aldoria more effectively, but they will also change some aspects of how we live and work together. Charlotte immediately set down her fork, her full attention focused on her mother. These changes are related to all the closed-door meetings and the extra security preparations, aren't they? She asked, demonstrating the observational skills that had always impressed the adults around her. Yes, they are, Alexander confirmed, appreciating his eldest daughter's directness. Over the past several months, your mother and I have been developing what we're calling the Winterbourne reforms, changes to how we approach our royal responsibilities that will make us more accessible to the people and more involved in community development across the kingdom. James leaned forward with interest, his political awareness engaging immediately. What kind of changes? Are we talking about constitutional modifications or changes in protocol and ceremony? Isabella smiled at her son's sophisticated question, which reflected his growing understanding of governmental structures and royal responsibilities. Primarily protocol and operational changes that fall within our existing constitutional authority. We'll be opening Winterbourne Estate to regular public tours throughout the year, participating more actively in community development programs, and generally making ourselves more accessible for public interaction. Emma, who had been listening carefully while continuing to eat, looked up with concern. Does that mean strangers will be walking around our house all the time? What about my treehouse and the secret garden we made behind the stable? Alexander reached over to gently squeeze his youngest daughter's hand. All your private spaces will remain completely private. We've carefully planned which areas of the estate will be included in public tours, and none of them are places where you play or study. Your treehouse and secret garden will be off limits to everyone except family. This reassurance visibly relieved Emma, who had always treasured the freedom she enjoyed at Winterbourne compared to the more formal atmosphere of their official residence in the capital. Will I still be able to ride my horse whenever I want to? Absolutely, Isabella assured her. Your daily routines and activities won't change unless you want them to. In fact, one of our goals with these reforms is to help all of you develop your own relationships with public service based on your interests and talents rather than following rigid traditional expectations. Charlotte's expression grew more serious as she processed the implications of what her parents were describing. When you say more accessible to the people, what exactly does that mean for us individually? Will we be expected to participate in these community programs and public interactions? Alexander appreciated the thoughtfulness of Charlotte's question, which demonstrated her understanding that royal reforms would inevitably affect the next generation's roles and responsibilities. We want each of you to participate in ways that match your interests and comfort levels. Charlotte, your passion for environmental conservation could connect beautifully with community sustainability programs. James, your historical research skills could enhance our educational initiatives. Emma, your love of animals might inspire programs that help children connect with nature and wildlife. James's eyes lit up with possibility as he considered his father's suggestions. Could I actually contribute research to the historical tours of the estate? I've been working on a project about the architectural evolution of Winterbourne that might be useful for visitors. That's exactly the kind of contribution we're hoping for, Isabella replied enthusiastically. Your research could become part of the educational materials we provide to tour groups, and you could even lead specialized tours for visitors who are particularly interested in architectural history. Emma bounced slightly in her chair with excitement. Could I show visitors the stables and introduce them to the horses? I know everything about taking care of them, and I could teach children about riding safely. Alexander and Isabella exchanged pleased glances as they realized their children's natural interests could indeed align with the public service opportunities the reforms would create. These are wonderful ideas, Alexander's. Part of our planning process will involve figuring out how to match your talents and interests with meaningful ways to serve the public. Charlotte, however, remained more cautious about the personal implications of increased public exposure. What about privacy and normal teenage experiences? I already feel like my social life is more complicated than my friends because of security requirements and media attention. Won't these changes make that worse? Isabella recognized her daughter's legitimate concerns, which reflected the ongoing challenge of balancing royal duties with normal adolescent development. We've thought carefully about privacy protections, especially for you and James as you navigate teenage social dynamics. The reforms actually include new guidelines that should give you more control over your public exposure, rather than less. Alexander elaborated on these protections, drawing from detailed discussions with security and media relations experts. Instead of having your public appearances dictated entirely by traditional royal protocol, you'll have more say in when and how you engage with public duties. If you're not ready for certain types of exposure, or if you want to focus on school and personal development, we can adjust your participation accordingly. James asked practical questions about timeline and implementation that demonstrated his understanding of the complexity involved in royal reforms. When do these changes begin, and how quickly will they be fully implemented? We're announcing the reforms publicly tomorrow, and the Christmas walk this weekend will be the first demonstration of our new approach, Isabella explained. But full implementation will happen gradually over several months to allow everyone, including all of us, to adapt successfully. Emma had finished her dinner and was now focused entirely on the family discussion. Will grandmother support these changes? She usually has strong opinions about royal traditions. Alexander smiled at his daughter's perceptive observation about her grandmother's traditional perspectives. Grandmother has concerns about some aspects of the reforms, but she supports our goals and will be participating in the Christmas walk to demonstrate family unity. She understands that times change, and that the monarchy must evolve to remain relevant and effective. The conversation continued through dessert as the children asked detailed questions about everything from security procedures to media relations. Their parents answered each inquiry patiently and honestly, recognizing that successful family adaptation to the reforms would depend on the children's understanding and comfort with the changes. Charlotte eventually asked the question that had been underlying her other concerns throughout the evening. Are these changes permanent, or could we reverse them if they don't work out as planned? Isabella appreciated her daughter's strategic thinking, which would serve her well in whatever role she eventually chose within or outside the royal family. The reforms are designed to be sustainable, long-term improvements to how we serve the public, but we're also building in evaluation mechanisms to assess what works well and what might need adjustment. Nothing we're doing is irreversible if we discover better approaches. Alexander added perspective based on his broader understanding of royal evolution throughout history. Every generation of our family has adapted royal service to meet the needs of their time. These reforms continue that tradition of evolution rather than representing a radical departure from royal responsibility. James asked about public reaction and media coverage, topics that interested him both personally and academically. How do you expect the public and the press to respond to the announcement? Are you prepared for criticism or skepticism? We expect mixed reactions, Isabella answered honestly. Some people will enthusiastically support greater royal accessibility and community engagement. Others will prefer traditional approaches to royal service. We are prepared for both positive and negative responses, and we're committed to demonstrating through our actions that these changes benefit everyone. Emma yawned as the evening grew later, but she remained engaged in the family discussion. Will the changes make your work more fun? You both seem happier when you're visiting schools and community centers than when you're at formal ceremonies. Her observation touched both parents deeply, as it reflected the genuine satisfaction they found in direct community engagement compared to traditional ceremonial duties. We hope so, Alexander replied. The reforms are designed to allow us to spend more time doing the kinds of public service that we find most meaningful and that seem to make the biggest difference in people's lives. As the formal dinner conversation concluded, the children's initial apprehension had transformed into curiosity and even excitement about the opportunities the reforms might create. Their questions had also helped Alexander and Isabella refine their thinking about implementation and family considerations. Charlotte stood first, approaching her parents with the maturity that had always characterized her approach to family responsibilities. I want you to know that I support what you're trying to accomplish, even though I'm still nervous about some of the personal implications. If these changes help you serve people more effectively, then I think they're worth trying. James echoed his sister's sentiments while adding his own perspective. I'm actually excited about the possibility of contributing my research and historical knowledge to public education. It makes royal service feel more meaningful and connected to my actual interests and talents. Emma hugged both parents enthusiastically, her natural optimism embracing the possibilities without dwelling on potential complications. I can't wait to show visitors how much I love the horses and help them understand why taking care of animals is so important. As the children prepared for bed, Alexander and Isabella remained in the dining room to process the evening's discussion. Their relief at the children's positive response was profound, but they also recognized the ongoing responsibility to support each child's adaptation to their changing family circumstances. They're going to handle this better than we imagined, Isabella observed, beginning to clear the table with familiar domestic routines that grounded their family life. Their questions tonight were more sophisticated and thoughtful than some we heard from the political advisors. Alexander nodded, feeling the last piece of his personal concerns about the reforms fall into place. Tomorrow's public announcement will transform everything from private planning to public reality, but tonight proved that our family foundation is strong enough to support whatever challenges we face. The evening had demonstrated that successful family adaptation to significant change required the same elements that made the reforms themselves viable: honest communication, respect for individual concerns, careful planning, and shared commitment to positive outcomes. With their household staff, government officials, and now their own children supporting the winter-born reforms, Alexander and Isabella felt ready to share their vision with the people of Aldoria and the world. Wednesday morning arrived with crystalline winter air that made the grounds of Winterbourne Estate appear almost magical in the early light. Alexander stood in his study, reviewing the final draft of their public statement one last time, while Isabella coordinated with their communications team to ensure simultaneous release to all major media outlets. Today would mark the end of months of careful planning and the beginning of a new chapter in their family's approach to royal service. The morning routine proceeded with unusual precision as household staff, security personnel, and communications specialists worked together to manage what would become one of the most significant royal announcements in decades. Peters had arrived early to coordinate logistics, ensuring that every detail was properly managed during the transition from private preparation to public scrutiny. Alexander's private secretary knocked quietly on the study door before entering with the morning briefing materials. "Your Highness, the media distribution is scheduled for 9 o'clock, and your televised address is confirmed for noon. The Prime Minister's office has confirmed they're ready with coordinated messaging, and security reports that all preparations for increased media attention are in place." "Thank you, Peters," Alexander replied, setting aside the statement draft that he had now reviewed dozens of times. "Please confirm with the communications team that I want to be available for questions immediately after the televised address. Transparency is central to these reforms, and that includes being accountable to media scrutiny from the beginning." Isabella joined them, carrying a folder containing feedback from the final review session with their constitutional advisors. "Lord Ashford's team has confirmed that all legal requirements have been satisfied, and they've prepared responses to potential constitutional questions that media might raise." The three of them spent the next hour reviewing logistics, coordinating timing, and ensuring that every aspect of the announcement process reflected the values of transparency, accessibility, and thoughtful communication that underpinned the reforms themselves. At 9 o'clock precisely, the formal statement was released simultaneously to newspapers, television networks, online media platforms, and international news services. The carefully crafted document outlined the Winterbourne reforms in clear, accessible language, while providing sufficient detail for serious analysis by constitutional experts and political commentators. The statement began with personal reflections from Alexander and Isabella about their experiences in royal service and their observations about changing public expectations and needs. It emphasized their commitment to maintaining the dignity and effectiveness of the monarchy while adapting their approaches to better serve the people of Aldoria in the modern era. Key elements of the reforms were presented as responses to specific opportunities for enhanced public service rather than criticisms of traditional approaches. The establishment of regular public tours was framed as sharing the historical and cultural treasures of Winterbourne Estate with the people whose support made royal service possible. Community partnership programs were described as ways to highlight and support the excellent work already being done by local leaders and organizations. Within minutes of the release, news outlets began reaching out for additional information, interviews, and background briefings. Alexander and Isabella's communications team, prepared for intense media interest, responded to inquiries while directing journalists toward the noon televised address for comprehensive discussion of the reforms. Social media reaction was immediate and varied, ranging from enthusiastic support for royal modernization to concerned questions about maintaining traditional values and constitutional stability. The diversity of responses had been anticipated, and the communications team monitored online discussions while preparing briefing materials that addressed the most common questions and concerns. Charlotte, James, and Emma had gone to their regular school classes at the estate's private tutorial center, but their instructors had been briefed about the announcement and were prepared to address any questions or concerns the children might have as news coverage developed throughout the day. The morning's media monitoring revealed that international coverage was particularly intense, with royal correspondents from around the world analyzing the potential implications of the Winterbourne reforms for monarchies in other countries. Several constitutional experts were quoted praising the careful legal framework that supported the changes, while others raised questions about the balance between accessibility and royal dignity. Alexander spent the late morning reviewing media coverage and refining his approach for the televised address. The variety of public reactions reinforced his commitment to direct communication and his willingness to engage with questions and concerns rather than simply announcing decisions without dialogue. Isabella used the time to coordinate with the household staff who would be most affected by increased public attention. Mrs. Henderson reported that several media outlets had contacted estate personnel seeking interviews or background information, but the staff had followed protocol by referring all inquiries to the official communications team. As noon approached, Alexander and Isabella prepared for the televised address that would provide their personal explanation of the reforms and demonstrate their commitment to transparent leadership. The broadcast would reach not only the people of Aldoria, but international audiences interested in royal evolution and constitutional development. The address took place in the Blue Drawing Room, where they had made their final decision just days earlier. Alexander spoke directly to the camera with Isabella seated beside him, their setting conveying both the dignity of royal authority and the warmth of family commitment to public service. "My fellow citizens of Aldoria," Alexander began, "today Princess Isabella and I are pleased to share with you our vision for the future of royal service in our kingdom. The reforms we are announcing represent our response to your evolving needs and our commitment to making the monarchy as relevant and effective as possible in serving your interests and aspirations." The address continued for 20 minutes, during which Alexander and Isabella explained their motivations, outlined specific changes, addressed potential concerns, and invited public engagement with the reform process. Their presentation emphasized continuity with royal traditions of service while acknowledging the need for adaptation to contemporary circumstances. Isabella spoke particularly about the family aspects of the reforms, explaining how they hope to model healthy relationships between public service and private life while giving their children opportunities to develop their own approaches to contributing to society. The concluding section of the address invited public participation in evaluating and refining the reforms over time. Alexander emphasized that successful modernization required ongoing dialogue between the monarchy and the people, and he committed to regular communication about progress and adjustments. Immediately following the televised address, Alexander and Isabella made themselves available for questions from assembled media representatives. The press conference atmosphere was respectful but thorough, with journalists raising constitutional, practical, and personal questions about the reforms and their implementation. Margaret Wells from the Aldorian Broadcasting Corporation asked about potential risks to royal security with increased public access. Alexander responded by outlining the enhanced security protocols that had been developed in coordination with protection services, emphasizing that public accessibility and royal safety were both essential priorities. David Thompson from the International Herald raised questions about constitutional precedents for the community partnership programs. Isabella addressed these concerns by referencing similar successful programs in other constitutional monarchies and emphasizing the non-partisan framework that would guide their participation. Sarah Chen from the Palace Press Association asked about the children's roles in the reformed approach to royal service. Alexander explained their commitment to allowing each child to develop their own relationship with public service based on their interests and comfort levels, while maintaining appropriate privacy protections during their education and personal development. The questions continued for 45 minutes, covering topics from budget implications to international relations effects of the reforms. Alexander and Isabella's willingness to engage directly with challenging questions demonstrated their commitment to the transparency that formed the foundation of their modernization efforts. Following the press conference, they spent the remainder of the afternoon reviewing media coverage and public reaction, while continuing preparation for the Christmas walk that would serve as the first public demonstration of their new approach to royal engagement. Evening news programs featured extensive coverage of the announcement, with analysis from constitutional experts, royal historians, and political commentators. Opinion polls conducted throughout the day showed strong public support for the reforms, with particularly positive responses from younger citizens who appreciated the increased accessibility and community focus. International reaction was equally positive, with several other monarchies expressing interest in studying the Aldorian reforms as potential models for their own modernization efforts. Constitutional scholars praised the careful legal framework that supported the changes while maintaining essential royal prerogatives and responsibilities. As evening approached, Alexander and Isabella gathered with their children for dinner and discussion of the day's events. The children had followed media coverage through their lessons and were curious about public reactions and next steps. Charlotte had particularly noticed social media discussions among young people, many of whom expressed enthusiasm about more accessible royal engagement with community issues they cared about. "The responses I saw from people my age were really positive," she reported. "They seem excited about the possibility of actually interacting with royal programs instead of just watching formal ceremonies." The constitutional scholars who were interviewed seemed to think you had done really careful work in developing reforms that strengthen rather than weaken royal institutions, he observed. Emma was most excited about the upcoming Christmas walk, which would be her first experience with the new approach to public engagement. "Will there really be more children there, and will I be able to talk to them about the horses and the estate?" she asked eagerly. Isabella confirmed that the Christmas walk would indeed reflect their new accessibility, while maintaining the traditional warmth and celebration that made the event special for families who attended. You'll have many opportunities to share your love of the estate and animals with visitors who will be delighted to meet you. As the family concluded their evening together, Alexander and Isabella felt profound satisfaction about the successful launch of their reform announcement. The positive public reaction, supportive media coverage, and enthusiastic family engagement exceeded their hopes and provided strong foundation for moving forward with implementation. The evening's quiet family time also reminded them that all their planning and public service ultimately aimed at creating a healthy balance between royal duty and personal fulfillment for their entire family. The reforms represented not just modernization of royal service, but also evolution toward more sustainable and meaningful approaches to public life. Tomorrow would bring final preparations for the Christmas walk that would transform their private vision into lived public reality. But tonight, surrounded by their children and reflecting on a day of successful communication with their people, Alexander and Isabella felt ready for whatever challenges and opportunities their new path might bring. The Winterbourne reforms had moved from careful planning to public reality, and the journey of implementation could now begin with confidence in both constitutional foundation and public support.